This story is about my dad's camper. My parents divorced when I was 2 years old, and they both remarried. So when it came to when I saw my parents, I lived primarily with my mother. But in the summers and on the vacations, like winter holidays or Thanksgiving, my father would come pick me up. Now, usually when my father picked me up, he would show up in what was like a camper van, so sort of like a Toyota truck with a big camper thing on the top that he would drive. So I lived in Del Mar, California, which is a very sunny place. And I lived in this big, white, blocky house. It was 2 stories with a loft and almost kind of looked like white Legos put together. And I remember usually my father would come in early summer to pick us up, and I would always look forward to it. So I would be in this valley, Carmel Valley, waiting for my father. It's like a dusty chaparral valley with, sagebrush and so on and so forth. And we had this really long driveway where there would be a road that went all the way to the freeway for a whole mile. And I could look all the way down the road. It was just a 1-lane road all the way to the freeway. And then it would finally get to my driveway. And then to have to go down this dusty driveway, all dirt, and then up and all the way up to my house, like a 1/4 of a mile of a driveway just to get to my house. So when I expected my father to come pick me up for summer, I get really, really excited about it because I love to see him. And so I would actually go down. My mom would say, oh, your father's going to come pick you up on Tuesday. Dad's going to come on Tuesday. And I'd be like, oh, yeah. And I'd get all packed and I'd get everything ready. I'd be so excited. And on Tuesday morning, I'd run downstairs and I'd get on the couch right by the window. And I'd look out that window and I'd look all the way down that driveway and then all the way down the mile-long paved 1-lane road to the freeway to look for my dad's camper to see when it was going to come. Now, sometimes it might take a while. I might be on that couch all morning looking out that window and, no dad. And sometimes, like a different kind of camper, a different car would go by and I'd be like, maybe that's him. But it never was. So that day I remember it was early summer, and I remember it was the afternoon. He still hadn't shown up, and so I'd go running around the house. Like, my mom, she'd usually be cooking or something like that, and I'd go, Mom, when do you think Dad's going to come? He's not here yet. And she'd, be getting dinner ready, and she'd say, he said he was going to come on Tuesday, so hopefully he comes today. I'm like, okay. And I go running up to my stepfather. He's usually fixing something, like he's behind the hot water heater banging with a hammer. I'm like, Rick, when do you think my dad's going to get here? And he said, oh, I don't know. Can you hand me those pliers? And I hand it to him. I go running up the stairs, and I'd find my brother's room. My brother would usually be reading there. He's always very calm. And I'd be like, Arnie, when do you think Dad's going to get here? And he'll say, oh, I don't know when he's going to get here. So, I'm reading my book. And I'd go back down to that couch, and I'd look out that window, and I'd watch cars go by the whole day. And sometimes my dad's car never showed up. And I'd go to dinner, and I'd ask, when do you think he's going to show up? And my mom said, well, he said he was going to come. And I'd be like, can you call Dad? And she'd say, okay, I'm going to call him. I'll call him. And then I'd go to bed. Now, in the morning, I'd wake up, and I'd be super excited, enthusiastic. Maybe Dad's here. And I go running down, I go look out the window and the door to see if his camper truck is parked outside. But it wasn't. So I went back to that couch, and I looked down the road. I'm like, maybe I could see him, maybe I can see him. And I waited, and still no Dad. Pretty soon I'd start running around the house again, and I'd go like, Mom, when do you think Dad's going to get here? Now, my dad, just so you know him, he's bald, and he's really nice. He's very kind, but he's kind of unpredictable. But he would always let me do things that, my mom wouldn't let me do. So, for example, when we were driving, sometimes he would let me shift the car. We used to have these old trucks that had these gear shifts where, he'd put the clutch in, and I'd put the car into first, and so on and so forth. So he used to let me do that. And my stepfather was a lot different. He was always fixing things. They were both really handy. But my stepfather, he was this big man with big beard, and he was a scientist, and he would play catch with me, even though he was super uncoordinated. He would still go in the backyard and play catch with me, and so I always appreciated that about him. But I really loved seeing my dad also. So anyways, I'd go running around the house again, Mom, when do you think he's going to get here? And she said, well, I called him, and I didn't get a hold of him, so I don't know, maybe today. Rick would still be fixing the hot water heater, and he'd go, I don't know when your father's going to get here. Can you hand me that? Can you hand me those needle nose pliers? I go running upstairs, and Artie'd still be reading his book, And the thing about Arnie is, like, he's my older brother, so I really looked up to him. And he was always reading, but he also is really into music, and he also taught me so much. Like, I still remember when I was in high school, I would always love all the bands that he would play. I remember one time he put this one band into the car, and he was playing it, and I was like, oh, this is terrible. I'll never like this band. I said, what is this band? He said, oh, this is The Clash. He said, you'll like it one day. And I was like, no, I'll never like it. And then, of course, 5 years later, I'm listening to The Clash. I'm like, Arnie, this is the greatest band of all time. So anyways, I went back down to back when I'm 7 years old, back to this story. I'm 7 years old. My brother's 12 years old. I go run back down to the couch, and I just, was so excited, and I just looked down that road waiting for my dad to show up. Well, finally, I'd see what I think was maybe his camper van. I'd be like, oh, could that be it? Could that be it? And I'd look, and I'd wait, and I'd have to wait until it turned down into my driveway. Then I'd know for sure. So I watch it, and I watch it. And then it turned down in the driveway, and the dust started shooting up. I was like, Dad's here! I went running around the house. Mom, Dad's here! Run by Rick. Rick, Dad's here! Run upstairs. Arnie, Dad's here! And I'd run into my room, and I'd get my suitcase, and I'd run downstairs, and I'd put it by the door. And by that time, my dad would be pulling up, and the truck would pull into next to the door. And I'd open the door, and I'd go running out. My dad would open the door, and me coming around, he'd have this big pot belly and his bald head, his glasses. I'd jump into his arms. Dad, so good to see you! And he said, how are you doing, son? So good to see you. And he'd come in, and usually my mom, because she's Chinese, she would invite him into dinner, so he'd stay for dinner. After dinner, it was California in the summer, so it stayed light for a long time. We'd get into the car, and the sun would be, casting that golden glow. And my dad would have me sit in the middle, and he said, do you want to shift, son? Do you want to shift the gears? I'm like, yeah. And Arnie would get into the passenger seat, and, he'd get his book out. And we'd get into that car, and my dad would, turn it on. He'd say, okay, son, put it in reverse. And he'd put the clutch in, I'd put it in reverse, and he'd back up. And they'd say, okay, son, wave to your mom, say goodbye. And me and Arnie would wave to mom, my mom. And both mom and Rick would be standing there, waving their hands, goodbye. And then we'd turn around, we'd go over that, dusty driveway, and we'd get back up onto the road. And then we start getting on that road. My dad would be like, okay, Mikko, put into first gear. And he'd speed up. He'd go, okay, put into second gear. And we start going faster. All right, start putting into third gear. Third gear, and we'd be going. And the yellow lines would be flying underneath us. And I'd look down. And I'd be so happy because I was with my dad, and I was in the center, and I was shifting. And at that moment, I would then ask him, I would say, hey, Dad, where are we going? And as I look back at that, I realize now that oftentimes my mom didn't know where we were going anyways. And I think, wow, that must have been really brave of her and very trusting to let her go with my dad, not knowing where I was going, not knowing when I would show back up. But she knew that it was important that I spend that time and that I loved him. And so she let go and let us go. So I admire my mom for that. That is the story of my dad's camper. Now you may notice that it actually follows a story chart. In our culture, stories always start with setting. So I told that story and told you about Del Mar, how it's sunny, told you about my house. The time of year was early summer, and I told you about the dust and the chaparral and the long driveway. And then I went into the characters, and I told you about myself. I was eager and 7 years old, and Arnie is a reader, very calm. My mom is Chinese, and she's kind of in charge. And Rick is my stepdad with a beard. My dad is bald and kind but unpredictable. And then the conflict is, what's the main problem in the story? What are we wondering is going to happen? So my dad is not showing up, and I'm worried that he won't ever show up. And that's why I keep running around the house wondering. The build-up is how the story builds. So my mom made a phone call to see. My brother Arnie was still reading. My mom was cooking. Rick was fixing things. And still my dad didn't show up. And the climax is where sort of the most exciting part happens. In this case, it's where my dad's camper finally comes into view. I jump up, and I run down to go greet him. And then the resolution is, what happens after that climax? We drive off, my mom is waving, Arnie is reading, I'm getting ready to shift. That is often how stories are structured in our culture, and I hope you enjoyed that story. Thanks.